And that's something, obviously, we're committed to do our part to ensure that people have what they need to rebuild their lives.
Yeah. And how is your collaboration with other humanitarian agencies? Is that growing? Is that easy? I mean, can you tell us?
No, we've got incredibly strong partnerships, whether or not it's with organizations outside the UN system, like the International Committee of the Red Cross, with whom we work very closely, especially on protection issues, but also on internal displacement. They're one of the largest partners inside Syria, for example, and then other UN partners, whether or not it's the World Food Program or UNICEF, for example, or the newest member of the UN family, the International Organization for Migration. But there are a number of strong partnerships we have. But like I said, we partner with about 900 organizations worldwide to deliver aid and protection.
There's a lot of lives at risk in doing so. So what do you find to be your word of advice or the best way to resolve this, minimizing risk of life and trying to come up with a positive outcome?
Mm-hmm. Well, we depend on governments. We depend on governments for political solutions in places like Syria and other parts of the world that are facing crisis and conflict. With political solutions, there's a lot we can do. We can make it possible for people to go home safely. We can make it possible for people to have choice. You'll see, for example, in the Syrian context, most people have chosen either to remain in Syria or to stay close to Syria because they want the option to be able to go home. They hold out hope that that's going to be impossible. That's going to be possible, rather. We saw 18 months ago desperation seeping in. It was the lack of political support, financial support. Humanitarian aid budgets were not being fully subscribed. The host communities were not being well supported. And people were not able to put their kids in school or to get the kind of health care that they required. So the migration and the refugee crisis really took off. And that was, I think, symptomatic of the lack of those solutions. So I think, when governments work together and when they work together multilaterally, as we've seen in many contexts through the decades, it's possible. In the migration crisis, for example, we've often said it is possible to protect and support if it's orderly and if it's managed, but that requires political will. And political will from governments.
I mean, the Syrian situation has just spiraled out of control since 2011. How is one supposed to see the bright side of it?
It is easy to become overwhelmed by the enormity of it. And we talk a lot about numbers, but behind every number that we describe, those 5 million refugees, for example, I mentioned, there's a story for each and every one. And some have done incredible things, whether or not it's persevered, found an education, been able to support their kids, saving their lives, what have you. And we focus on the individuals that we're really trying to help. Right. And I think if you think about those people that you've met in various places, whether or not it's in the region or inside Syria, and that keeps us going because we know that they have hope. So we have to have hope.
In September 2016, the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants was signed by world leaders. Has it lived up to the UNHCR's expectations?
So yes, you mentioned, thanks for raising this, 193 countries, 193 signed the New York Declaration last September. And this was intended as a way to show that we can come together as an international community and share the responsibilities for 65 million forcibly displaced. And we are in the process now, between now and September of 2018, of putting together what they call a global compact. There are two, one on refugees and one on migrants. And we're particularly involved in the refugee compact. Part of that compact, should those countries come back and endorse what they said last September they were prepared to do, is to design ways that we can respond to large-scale movements of refugees, that we can support host countries, that we can look at development needs of forced displacement, that we can be sure that we're sharing responsibility, whether or not it's resettlement, third country resettlement for refugees, or what we call alternative pathways, sending kids to school, scholarships, finding ways for those, even if they can't go home, if they can't resettle, because only so many are able to be resettled each year, or they're not able to integrate where they are locally, that we find other ways to support them and find solutions. And so we're quite hopeful that in the next year that we'll make this work in places like Uganda and Tanzania and Somalia, Central America, and parts of Asia.